There was a deep and appropriate, beautiful affection between Paul and Timothy. We talked about it last time. What we see in 2 Timothy chapter 1, in verse 4, where Paul writes, "Remembering your tears, I long to see you so that I may be filled with joy." I believe that Paul was unashamed of his emotional affection for Timothy, his dear son. I guess I'm on kind of a little bit of a campaign that among Christians, the Christians that I grew up with, we often feel somehow that our emotions need to be minimized. And it's almost as if the teaching would be, God doesn't really care about what you feel, just obey. Which, by the way, have faith, but obey. Oh, okay, I grew up that way. I don't want to go back to that, and I don't want to encourage anybody else in it. And an aspect of that has to do with that your feelings, having feelings, is fully legitimate. Now, that doesn't mean every feeling is legitimate, and Paul's not talking about that, but this is a very legitimate emotional expression. I long to see you so that I may be filled with joy, Paul writes. Okay. And then he goes on in verse 5. I am reminded of your sincere faith. Okay, first of all, sincere faith. I know of people who in their mind, their sincerity trumps truth. In other words, what is true is not that big a deal to them. Their sincerity about what they, how they respond in the world, that trumps everything. That's not what Paul's saying. However, when he talks about sincere faith, he's talking about authenticity of faith. I believe I have sincere faith and doubts. Yeah, I've been a Christian for 60 years, and I still struggle with doubt sometimes. Sorry. I can't imagine anybody's got me on a pedestal anyway, but I struggle with doubts. I don't think this is wrong. You see, I don't think doubt is the opposite of faith. Doubt may be a vital part of faith itself. I don't think any of us are going to just skip through life in such an easy breezy, mac and cheesy kind of way that we're never going to have doubts. We just know. We just fully convinced. I don't think that's unrealistic in my opinion. So I wonder if Timothy may have had doubts, but what Paul remembers is his sincere faith. I don't necessarily think Paul was saying, I remember your childlike faith. I don't read that in there. I don't read your childish faith. I don't even read his absolute faith. I read his sincere faith. When Paul thought of Timothy, he said, first of all, I remember your sincere faith. I want that to be true of me. That when people think of me, they would think of authenticity. My sincere faith, which will have, if it's sincere, if it's authentic, it has to include my weakness, the I guess I would term it biblically, the manifold weaknesses of my own faith. Stephen Covey, in 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he writes that it's a good idea to work on your eulogy while you're alive, because the truth is, however I am living right now and have lived, I have been all the while writing my eulogy, because I am leaving. This is the virtually the only inheritance that I can leave behind. I think for a lot of Christians, we only want to leave behind all the wonderful things about our lives, the admirable. Well, I'm going to just tell you, there's a lot of stuff in there in my life story that I don't consider admirable. I just consider the grace of Christ has overwhelmed those things. He has overwhelmed my weaknesses, my sin, my propensity with his grace. Okay, Paul says, I am reminded of your sincere faith. And don't forget, there's context here. As he is night and day constantly remembering Timothy in his prayers. That's what he said in verse 3. I am reminded of your sincere faith. I really want that to be true. So, and there, if my faith is sincere, in my opinion, sincere faith connects with all of my life, not just a compartment of my life, the religious compartment. Because our culture has become so negative toward Christians and Christianity, we have this terminology that is more politically correct. We call them, if you are a Christian, which all the time I was growing up, being a Christian wasn't a pejorative. It was that was not a criticism. That was just an observation. But it's become, okay, I'm going off on a riff here. In our culture, that has become gauche. It don't. Now, if you want to refer to a Christian, you need to say a person of faith. Well, yeah. You can't be a Christian and not be a person of faith. But here's the thing. That is just one shade past what I feel is a very deceitful category, or a nomenclature for a category, which is they're a very spiritual person. You do realize that you don't have to be a Christian to be a spiritual person. And, oh, by the way, that's why that terminology came to be. Because we don't want to offend anybody. We don't want to hurt anybody's feelings by, leaving them out of this good category. They are spiritual. They don't know Jesus. They don't care so much about Jesus. And they may not even believe in God, but they are in touch with their spiritual being and the spiritual nature of life. All right, I'll move off of that and just say that's not what Paul's talking about at all. Paul is saying, I am reminded of your sincere faith. I want that to be what people make. When I think of Paul thinking of Timothy and his sincere faith, I would also, when I think of the mainly guys and sometimes now women who I poured into and had this kind of affection for in my ministry life, my life in general. But when I think about their sincere faith, I also remember their sense of humor, their honestly, some of them had quirks. I have quirks. That's why we probably connected. Okay. I'm reminded of your sincere faith. And then he goes on, and now he's going to talk about Timothy's faith heritage, which first lived in your grandmother Lois and in your mother Eunice, and I am persuaded now lives in you also. If you come from a family where your heritage is a Christian faith heritage, wow, that's fabulous. I'm grateful this is the case with me. My dad's mom, my granny, was a hoot. And she didn't have a very airtight theology, but she loved God with her whole heart. She prayed and prayed and prayed, and my dad was convinced that he survived his life because of his mom's prayers. And when my dad finally gave in, I say finally, he was a young man. I mean, that's a whole big story. But anyway, when he gave in to God, it was partly because of his mom and her influence. And I said yes to Jesus as a young man because my whole family life I don't remember a time where we didn't think about and talk about and pray to and through Jesus. Now, my mom's family was not that way. She was raised by two alcoholic parents, and her life was scarred by that. And yet, my faith heritage comes from her. See, you might be the first in your family to come to Jesus, to confess him, to give your life to him, and to live by his grace. You may be the very first. But if you are, you can leave a heritage. Just like Eunice and Lois. Lois was the grandmother, Eunice was the mother. They're in reverse alphabetical order, if you need to keep that in mind for when you go on Jeopardy and the category is. Anyway, I'm so grateful for my Christian heritage. And I hope, I dearly hope, that all three of my daughters and all four of my grandkids will feel that same thing. And Paul said, I know you got it from your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and I am persuaded that same faith lives in you also. Now, persuaded. It doesn't mean, I'm pretty sure. No, it means I'm convinced that this faith that began with Lois and then was transferred to Eunice, and then from Eunice and Lois on to Timothy, that faith was still living, not existing, now lives in you also. There's a very interesting aspect of faith, that it can be alive or dead. We're going to come back to that next time, on Soul Care with Stevie Boy.